Tonight we have Dr. Litter in our studios, a very special guest. He's indeed a well-recognized food scientist, interviewed by our very own Zach Martinez. Let's take it to the studio with Zach Martinez, shall we? Zach, how are you doing?
Excellent. And you?
I'm excellent. Thanks for asking. So I understand you're doing an interview with Dr. Litter, who teaches us the true colors of artificial food coloring and the damages that it does to our bodies, especially the bodies of our children. Am I correct?
That's right. I'm sure we and our viewers are going to learn something very important and educational today.
Alright, great. Let's listen into their conversation. Dr. Litter is actually being interviewed from his home, so let's take it there, shall we? Good evening, Dr. Litter. How are you?
Good evening, Zach. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you. So we're going to learn about food coloring today, are we?
Yes, we are going to be learning about food coloring today because I think it's a very important topic. People don't really know much about food coloring, and I think they need to know more. Alright, before we start off, I just want to let the viewers know that these artificial food colorings are very unnatural, and they're produced from various chemicals, for example, naphthalene sulfonic acid, otherwise known as FD&C red number 40. These are petroleum-based azo dyes that are chemically made up of essentially the same chemicals that are used to fuel your cars, and that is by no means healthy. So I hope this is going to be very educational for you guys, this interview, as that's what we're going to be hopefully talking about, just teaching the viewers how these artificial dyes are very unhealthy for us.
Alright, let's dive into our first question here, shall we? Okay, what is artificial food coloring, and how much of our food contains artificial food coloring?
Well, artificial food coloring is basically color that we add into our food. If it weren't for artificial food coloring, much of our food would be like great or just bland, you know? So we kind of use it to make our food more appealing, and it's widely used, you know? It's used in almost everything we eat, from the Skittles to even the fruit, the natural fruit, and hot dogs, basically every single thing we eat, almost anything that has bright, vibrant colors, artificial food coloring is in there.
How does it work?
When a concentrated food coloring molecule encounters the photon that it's designed to absorb, the molecules change in that the electrons are excited by the photons. The electrons shift to another quantum level using the photon's energy in the process. The dye molecule is then left in an excited state, okay? When the photon's energy is all absorbed, the electron releases the photon's energy as thermal energy and returns to its original quantum level. The photon has disappeared at that point, but is quickly replaced by another wavelength of light. I know it's kind of hard to understand, but that's the most simple way I could put it.
What are some advantages and disadvantages of using food coloring?
Food coloring is not good for us in any way. All it does is bad things. There's not any good points other than it adds color to our food. There's no health benefits, no environmental benefits to using food coloring, but there's a lot of bad points of using food coloring. I'm gonna take you through the colors that are approved by the FDA but are harmful towards our health. Starting with blue number 2, it causes tumors, particularly brain gliomas in rats. It's used in colored beverages, candies, pet foods. And moving on, red number 2, it's toxic to rodents at modest levels and causes tumors of the urinary bladder and possibly other organs. It's in the skins of Florida oranges. Next is green number 3. It causes significant increase in bladder and testes tumor in male rats. It's used in personal care products, cosmetic products, except in eye area, candies, beverages, ice creams, you name it. And next is red number 3. Recognized in 1990 by the FDA as thyroid carcinogen in animals and is banned in cosmetics and externally applied drugs. It's used in sausage casing, oral medication, baked goods, and candies. Next is red number 40. This is the most widely used and consumed dye. It may accelerate the appearance of immune system tumors in mice. It also causes hypersensitivity reaction in some consumers, and it might trigger hyperactivity in children. It's used in bakery goods, dessert powders, candies, cereals, cosmetics. And next is yellow number 5. Yellow number 5 actually sometimes causes severe hypersensitivity reactions and might trigger hyperactivity and other behavioral effects in children. It's used in numerous bakery goods, beverages, desserts, powders, candies, and gelatin desserts. Finally is yellow number 6. It causes adrenal tumors in animals, occasionally causes severe hypersensitivity reactions. It's used in colored bakery goods, cereal, beverages, dessert powders, candies, gelatin desserts, sausages, you name it. So you can see all these harmful food coloring additives are in a lot of our foods, that we still eat them. They're approved by the FDA, but they're harmful. So that just kind of makes you think, like, can we trust our government with our food?
What are the implications of banning the use of this additive?
Well, the implications of banning the use of this additive would be better health for our general public, not only for the adults, but especially for the children. As studies show, food coloring actually worsens children's ADHD symptoms, and it increases their hyperactivity. Studies published in the Lancet Pediatrics and Journal of Pediatrics suggest that some children with ADHD are adversely affected by the food additives, such as food coloring. For example, there was this one case where a mother, Susan, served her 6-year-old son, Jimmy, breakfast like blueberry muffin with a bowl of Fruit Loops and a cup of Sunny D citrus punch. She saw how his ADHD worsened and he was becoming more hyperactive. His teachers were sending complaints to Susan how Jimmy was very unfocused in class. But then for a week she stopped giving him that. She gave him more natural alternatives, and she saw how his ADHD symptoms reduced and his hyperactivity reduced, and how he was performing better in school because his teachers would report back to Susan and tell him how much better Jimmy's been doing. So this kind of really shows how reducing the use of food coloring in our foods would actually improve our health.
What would happen if it could be used without any restriction?
Well, according to foodsafety.gov, the FDA uses the best science available to determine whether the food additives such as food colorings are safe. Well, when artificial food colors are approved for use, a number of restrictions are set in place, including the types of food that these dyes can be used in, the maximum amount in which they can be used, and how these dyes should be identified on the food label. In addition, all approved food colors are subject to ongoing review as testing methods continue to improve. So, taking all that into consideration, if all those restrictions are taken away, companies could add as much food color as they want to make it more appealing. So they can make the colors, the food for the children especially, more colorful, because as we know, children are attracted to vibrant colors, and they can make our fruits, vegetables look more vibrant, look more rich in nutrients, which will attract us. But instead of being beneficial to our health, those foods will be more harmful. So that's the conclusion that we could draw if no restrictions were set in place, that all these food dyes would be added into our food and would decrease our health, and they would be a health risk towards us as a society.
Should the industry be allowed to self-regulate the use of this additive?
Well, I don't think at all that the industry should be allowed to self-regulate the use of this additive, because that would be very dangerous for the public's health. Because even now, when there's restrictions, they're looking for what's more economically beneficial to them. See, because they're not using natural food coloring, which is more healthy. They're using artificial food coloring, which causes cancers, allergies, and worsens children's ADHD. So if they were allowed to self-regulate that, they would just overlook the health issues, and they would simply look at the economic benefit that using artificial dyes brings. So I think they shouldn't be allowed to self-regulate this at all.
How might other stakeholders view this issue? what would their arguments be?
Okay, so other stakeholders like chief financial officer of a food company and supermarket ordering manager, they might have different points of view on this, because since I'm listing the negative points and because I'm looking at the general public of the health, they might look at the financial benefits that come along with using artificial food coloring over natural food coloring. Their arguments might be how it's less expensive to use, so it's cheaper for the general public. It also is more consistent. It's better than natural food coloring because it's more consistent and economically more beneficial. So they might list the positive points to make consumers think that it's safe and good. They might say how why would it be FDA approved if it wasn't healthy, which I certainly am against, because that's what I'm trying to argue. Because why are they approved by the FDA if they are harmful? So they might take that as in a positive light and say if it wasn't healthy it wouldn't be FDA approved, and it's more economically beneficial and it's more consistent. They might argue that.
Should Canada adopt another country's approach? If so, what country?
Definitely. I think Canada should adopt another country's approach. For example, well, it's not a country, but Europe, more specifically Norway and England. They've gone so far as in to completely ban the use of artificial food coloring because they deem it unsafe for the public. So if that kind of makes you think, if they think it's too unsafe to use and it's harmful towards our health, why are we using it? Why here in Canada are we using artificial food coloring? For example, Norway and England, they only use natural food coloring, so that kind of improves their health, which makes me think, what's our government doing? Do they not care about our health? So I definitely think they should adopt, for example, Europe's approach to this food coloring issue, because if we don't address this issue now, it can worsen our health, our children's health, and our children's health. So I think it's a very important issue, and Canada should definitely learn from Europe on how to deal with food coloring as an issue.
Thanks, Dr. Litter, for sharing that with us. I'm sure our viewers learned a lot today, and I never knew food coloring was like this, especially the hyperactivity with children. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Dr. Litter.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Zach. I hope you and your viewers learned something very important today. I'll see you next time.
Alright folks, I'm afraid this was all the time we had today. This was your host, Zach Martinez, and we'll see you next time on Z News.